The cafe's warm lights flickered like nervous secrets, and the moment the door swung shut behind the two of them, the air tightened. She slid into the booth without looking up, already knowing the truth he hoped she hadn't seen. The evidence she carried felt heavier than the coffee mug between her hands, but the strangest part wasn't that he cheated. No, it was the fear in his eyes. The way he kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone else had walked in with them. How could he look so guilty and terrified at the same time? Was this still a date or a setup? Her heartbeat pulsed like a warning as she leaned forward and whispered that she knew everything. His breath hitched. Somewhere deep in that tiny crowded cafe, something shifted, and she realized this betrayal was only the beginning. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, but the sound echoed in her chest long after she stepped into the rain-washed street. The night carried a cold sting, the kind that seeped into bones already rattled by betrayal. She tried to breathe steadily, but every inhale tangled with the words she wished she had said, and the ones she feared were true. His face, pale, shaken, far more frightened than guilty, kept flashing in her mind like a warning sign she didn't yet understand. Cars passed in streaks of white and red, the city humming around her as if unaware that her world had just cracked. She walked quickly, telling herself she didn't care anymore, yet every step felt like she was marching toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. Something was following her. Not footsteps, not a person, just a feeling that the night had shifted. She slipped into the small alley shortcut she had taken 100 times before, but today the space felt too narrow, the shadows too deliberate. Water dripped from metal fire escapes, each tap echoing louder than it should. She kept walking, convincing herself she was being dramatic, that her racing heartbeat was just the leftover debris of the confrontation inside the cafe. But something told her to glance back. She didn't see anyone, yet the air felt watched, held, traced by someone else's intent. She pulled her coat tighter, swallowing the fear rising in her throat. The night was supposed to be the end of something painful, but the silence around her made it feel like the beginning of a slow unraveling. She forced herself forward, knowing that if she stopped now, she might hear something she wasn't ready for. When she reached the corner where the alley spilled onto a wider street, she paused, letting the city's louder rhythm wash over her. The light from a passing bus swept across her face, revealing the confusion she could no longer brush aside. She replayed the moment inside the cafe, his darting eyes, the trembling breath, the way he kept glancing behind her, as though the danger wasn't her anger, but something else entirely. She ran a hand over her forehead, trying to steady herself. Maybe this wasn't about the cheating. Maybe this wasn't even about her. The idea chilled her. A truth she hadn't considered, one that broadened the night into something deeper than heartbreak. She stepped into the main street, feeling the world tilt, as if urging her to pay attention. She crossed the street, letting the chaos of traffic create a barrier between them, even though she wasn't sure he was still following. A group of strangers brushed past her, their conversations floating away like fragments from another world. She stopped beneath the glowing storefront sign, catching her breath as the weight of everything finally settled. She told herself she should feel relieved. She confronted him. She walked away. She reclaimed the power he had taken. But something deeper gnawed at her. The way he looked at her wasn't the look of a man caught cheating. It was the look of someone drowning in a secret too heavy to confess. The cold night pressed against her spine as a distant rumble of thunder stirred the air. She realized she wasn't walking away from a broken heart. She was walking toward a mystery she never asked for. The next morning began with the kind of silence that feels staged, as if the world had temporarily stepped back to watch what she would do next. She sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her, while her phone buzzed with messages she didn't want to read. Friends wanted updates, her job demanded attention, but her mind kept circling the same moment. The look he gave her right before she walked out. It wasn't guilt, it was warning. She replayed it again and again, trying to find logic in emotion, meaning and fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of something closing in on them both. She told herself to move on, to forget the night, but curiosity clawed deeper. The truth didn't want to be ignored. It wanted to be found. She forced herself outside, hoping the cold morning air would clear her thoughts. The city felt different today. Sharper, more alert, like it had been waiting for her to step into its rhythm again. She walked briskly, letting the noise of commuters drown out the questions in her head. But the peace didn't last long. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "Don't trust him." Her pulse jolted. The message wasn't angry or dramatic. It felt cold, precise, like someone delivering a fact rather than a threat. She looked around instinctively, scanning faces, searching for a hint of who might be watching. Suddenly, the betrayal she thought she understood shifted into something stranger, something hiding right beneath the surface of her everyday world. Instead of going to work, she found herself drifting toward the cafe from the night before. She told herself she just wanted to see it in daylight, to reclaim the space that now felt haunted by questions. But when she arrived, everything looked too normal. The warm lights, the clinking dishes, the calm morning customers. It unsettled her more than chaos would have. She took a seat in the corner, watching the entrance like he had last night. Had someone been watching him? Had they been watching both of them? Her leg bounced with restless energy. She wanted answers, but all she had were scattered clues that made her feel like she had stepped into the middle of someone else's story. And she had no idea how far it went. She didn't expect him to find her there. But when he walked in, her stomach dropped. He scanned the room quickly, spotting her almost instantly. His expression wasn't angry. It was desperate. She stood before he even reached the table, ready to demand answers. But he quietly begged her to step outside, his voice shaking in a way that told her this wasn't about apologies. It was about danger. She hesitated, torn between mistrust and the gnawing fear that something serious had wrapped itself around both of their lives. When she finally followed him out onto the sidewalk, the morning felt heavier, as if the world had paused to listen. He said they needed to talk, somewhere private, and the look in his eyes made her realize she might not want to hear what came next. They walked side by side down a quieter street, neither speaking, both trapped in the weight of unasked questions. When he finally stopped, he looked at her with an exhaustion she had never seen before. He told her someone had been following him for weeks, someone who didn't want him near her. His voice broke as he admitted the cheating wasn't what she thought, that it wasn't even something he chose. The confession hit her like cold water. She stepped back, confused, angry, overwhelmed. Nothing made sense anymore. The betrayal she thought she understood twisted into something darker and more complicated. And as she tried to steady her breath, she realized the truth wasn't just chasing him. It was closing in on her too. She didn't know where to go after his confession, but her instincts pushed her toward answers rather than distance. She wasn't going to let fear guide her. Not anymore. If someone had been manipulating him, then someone had also been manipulating her life without her knowledge. The thought made her stomach twist. She walked through the city with quick, determined steps, replaying every odd moment from their relationship. The missed calls, the late nights, the sudden panic he tried to hide. None of it had made sense then. Now it all felt interconnected, part of a larger pattern she had never noticed. She decided to start with the people who knew him best, hoping their truths would fill the gaps he refused to explain. As she headed toward his old workplace, a heaviness settled in her chest, like she was stepping deeper into a story that wasn't meant for her. She arrived at the building where he once worked, a narrow structure tucked between a bank and a convenience store. The receptionist recognized her immediately, surprise flickering across her face before settling into cautious politeness. When she asked about him, the woman hesitated, glancing toward the back hallway as if afraid of being overheard. She leaned in and whispered that he had left abruptly weeks ago. No notice, no explanation. Her voice dropped further as she admitted strange men had come asking about him afterward, the kind who didn't give names. A chill crept up her spine. She thanked the receptionist and stepped outside, the truth now pulling her along with quiet force. If strangers had been looking for him, then everything he said might have been real, and she wasn't sure whether that comforted her or terrified her. Driven by a growing mix of dread and determination, she reached out to one of his old friends, someone he used to speak highly of before their relationship began to crack. When he agreed to meet, she sensed hesitation in his voice. They met in a small park, the kind where the breeze always felt colder than it should. He arrived, looking startled, as if expecting someone else to be waiting. When she explained what was happening, he stiffened instantly. He confessed that Elias had been acting strange for months, jumping at sounds, checking over his shoulder, canceling plans abruptly. He admitted he'd seen Elias arguing with someone near a parking garage late one night, someone whose face he couldn't fully make out. The friend urged her to be careful, saying whatever was happening wasn't simple jealousy or lies. It was something dangerous and growing. Her search led her to the last person on her list, his sister. She hadn't spoken to her in months, not since before everything fell apart. When she showed up unannounced, the woman looked startled, then worried. After a long pause, she invited her inside. The apartment was quiet, filled with the scent of old books and lavender candles. When she finally asked about Elias, his sister's expression collapsed into something between fear and grief. She explained that he had been hiding something bigger than any of them understood, something that had dragged him into a mess he didn't know how to escape. She said he had been trying to protect someone, though she never said who. The silence that followed wrapped around them like a warning. And suddenly she realized the truth was closer than ever. She stepped outside after the conversation, stopping on the stairwell as the afternoon light pressed across her shoulders. Everything she'd learned pointed in the same direction. Someone had been controlling him, and the cheating was only a small fracture in a much larger break. But what unsettled her most was the repeated theme. Every person she spoke to hinted that she was somehow at the center of whatever frightened him. She felt the weight of that realization settle into her bones. As she reached the sidewalk, her phone vibrated again. Another unknown message. This one was just 2 words. They know. Her heart clenched. She didn't know who they were or what they knew, but suddenly it felt like the world around her had shifted once again. And this time, the danger was moving fast. The message clung to her thoughts as she walked, each step tightening the unease coiling through her chest. They know. The words felt less like a warning and more like a countdown. She kept replaying her conversations from the day, every hint, every pause, every frightened glance. Each person she spoke to seemed terrified of something they couldn't name aloud. She tried to steady her breathing, but the afternoon air felt thin, as if the city itself had shifted its weight onto her shoulders. She knew she needed to find him again, not out of longing but necessity. If someone had set their lives on a collision course, she needed answers. He no longer had the luxury to hide. As she turned the corner toward the street where they last spoke, she sensed a presence behind her. Something quiet, deliberate, and tracking her steps with intent. She didn't wait for him to speak. She stepped forward, demanding answers with a firmness that surprised even her. His face tightened. The same fear she noticed last night now sharpened into urgency. He told her they didn't have time. Not here, not out in the open. He pointed toward the sedan she had noticed earlier, and whispered that whoever was inside wasn't watching him. They were watching her. A chill crawled down her spine as she tried to make sense of his words. He explained that the strange men who came after him weren't after the truth. They were after leverage. And somehow, without ever knowing, she had become the leverage they needed. The revelation struck with the force of a breaking wave, shattering the last pieces of what she thought she understood. They ducked into a narrow side street, footsteps echoing between tall brick walls. He said he never meant to hurt her, but he hadn't known how to explain the truth without putting her in even more danger. The cheating had been a trap, he said. Forced, manipulated, staged to keep her from becoming suspicious of the real threat closing around them. She felt anger burning beneath her skin, tangled with disbelief and the faint sting of sympathy. She wanted to scream, to run, to forget. But instead, she walked beside him, each step pushing them deeper into a maze of secrets. As they reached the end of the alley, she realized danger wasn't just chasing him. It was now staring her directly in the face. They reached the edge of the alley where a narrow street opened into a run-down lot. Before she could ask what they were doing there, a figure stepped from behind an abandoned van. A woman she didn't recognize. Calm, steady, expression unreadable. The stranger told Elias to stop running. Her voice was soft but carried an authority that made the air shiver. Elias moved in front of her instinctively, but the woman only shook her head, saying the real conversation wasn't with him. Her heart thudded painfully. The stranger looked at her with unsettling familiarity, as if she had been studying her for far too long. And when she said they had much to discuss, the world tilted again, leaving her breathless with dread. The woman's words unraveled the last threads of her understanding. She explained that Elias had been caught in something larger than either of them. An operation built around information, manipulation, and fear. But what struck her hardest was the revelation that she had been at the center from the beginning. Not because of anything she did, but because of something she unknowingly possessed. Elias whispered apologies, but his voice barely reached her. She felt the ground shift beneath her as the woman warned that things were about to escalate, and running was no longer an option. Her pulse pounded in her ears, the truth settling in like a storm. She wasn't collateral damage. She was the target. And everything that came next would demand more strength than she had ever been forced to find. Her breath caught as Saren's words repeated in her mind, twisting through every memory she thought she understood. She felt like she was standing in the center of a spiderweb, every strand tugged by hands she couldn't see. Elias tried to speak, but she lifted a hand to silence him, needing a moment to keep herself from falling apart. The world felt too bright, too loud, as if every sound pressed against her skin. What could she possibly possess that made her a target? She searched her past for clues, for moments that felt out of place, but nothing matched the fear in Saren's eyes. Elias stepped toward her, his face marked by regret so deep it seemed to hollow him out. She wanted to yell, to demand why he hadn't trusted her sooner. But the truth was already roaring ahead of them, and there was no turning back. Saren led them into the abandoned building adjacent to the lot, a place filled with dust, silence, and the faint echo of forgotten stories. The air smelled of old wood and rusted metal. Saren paced slowly, choosing her words with unsettling precision. She explained that Elias had been blackmailed, forced into situations designed to keep her distracted and emotionally vulnerable. The other woman had never been a lover. She had been a pressure point. The cheating had been orchestrated, weaponized. He hadn't betrayed her for selfishness, but out of fear that refusing would put her in immediate danger. The revelation landed heavily, almost unbearable. She felt anger, pity, confusion, and something more complicated, reluctant understanding. But the truth left no comfort. If they had gone to such lengths, then whatever they wanted from her wasn't small. It was something worth manipulation, intimidation, and silence. Her mind spun as she tried to piece together what Saren left unsaid. Every detail pointed to something in her possession, something she didn't even know she had. Saren finally handed her a small envelope, worn at the edges, explaining that it had been intercepted before it reached her. The envelope contained documents tied to a company she barely remembered interacting with, a place she had worked at briefly, years ago. She unfolded the papers, her eyes scanning numbers and signatures that meant nothing to her. But the expression on Elias's face told her everything. These documents were worth far more than she understood. She felt a shiver crawl across her skin. The truth wasn't just about betrayal or secrets. It was about power she had never known she carried, and people willing to do anything to claim it. She stepped away from them, needing space to breathe. The papers felt like they burned in her hands. If what Saren implied was true, then she had been a target long before Elias entered her life, long before she knew any of this existed. She wondered how much of her life had been shaped by hands she couldn't see. Elias approached her slowly, voice breaking as he apologized for everything. His lies, his silence, his weakness. She wanted to hate him, but the truth was too complicated for simple emotion. She turned toward him, torn between the fury of betrayal and the heaviness of everything he had endured to protect her. The air in the warehouse felt tight, compressed with the weight of decisions they could no longer avoid. Saren finally broke the silence. She told them the people behind this were becoming impatient, and whatever time they had left was shrinking quickly. The documents weren't valuable because of what they contained, but because of what they proved. Evidence of decisions made by powerful individuals who believed she would never discover the truth. Saren explained that the only way forward was to expose the information before those searching for her closed in. Elias stepped beside her, offering support despite the fear shadowing his features. She looked at both of them, feeling the weight of destiny press against her spine. She hadn't asked for this, but it had found her anyway. And now she had to decide whether she would run or rise. Her heart steadied. She chose. The warehouse doors groaned as they stepped into the cooling afternoon, the world outside humming with a tension that made her nerves prickle. She clutched the documents tightly, feeling the gravity of every choice ahead. Elias walked beside her, silent but alert, his eyes scanning every passing car, every shifting shadow. Saren guided them down a narrow service road, insisting they had to move fast before the people hunting them realized the documents were in her hand. Each step felt heavier than the one before, as if the path itself resisted their progress. She sensed the danger growing closer, an invisible pulse in the air that quickened her breath. The truth was no longer something she sought. It was something she carried, and it painted a target on her back. As distant footsteps echoed behind them, she knew their time was nearly gone. They reached a pedestrian underpass, the air thick with damp concrete and echoing traffic above. Saren motioned for them to keep low, her voice barely a whisper as she explained that the group chasing them had already swept through nearby blocks. The underpass felt like a temporary refuge, a place where the world narrowed into a single path they had no choice but to follow. She felt her pulse in her fingertips as she clutched the documents tighter, the pages that had shifted her entire reality. Elias touched her shoulder gently, reminding her they were in this together, though fear still shadowed his features. A sudden noise echoed from the far end of the tunnel. A scrape, a footstep, something unmistakably intentional. Saren's eyes hardened. They were no longer just being watched. They were being cornered. The silhouette emerged fully, revealing not one figure but two, moving with slow, deliberate purpose. Saren stepped forward, signaling them to stay back. She spoke to the intruders with a commanding tone, but they ignored her entirely, their attention fixed on the woman holding the documents. She felt a cold wave roll through her bones as one of them called her by name, a detail she had never shared beyond her small circle. She tightened her grip as her heart thundered. Elias whispered that they needed to run, but there was no clear exit, only the darkening end of the tunnel behind them and the two figures blocking the way ahead. The air thickened with impending conflict, and she realized that the truth she carried had finally drawn out the people willing to claim it by force. Saren moved faster than she expected, pushing them toward the far exit while she intercepted the advancing pair. The sounds of struggle echoed sharply through the tunnel. Shuffling feet, grunts of exertion, the thud of bodies against concrete. She hesitated, torn between helping Saren and obeying Elias's insistence that they needed to run. Every instinct told her to fight, but she knew Saren had chosen her position for a reason. Elias pulled her toward the exit, urging her to protect the documents first. As they stumbled into fading daylight, she felt the weight of guilt settle on her ribs. The fight behind them intensified, and a sudden cry made her chest tighten. Saren was risking everything to buy them seconds Seconds that might be the difference between escape and capture. They burst into the open air, lungs burning, hearts racing. The city felt suddenly enormous, its streets stretching endlessly in every direction. Elias urged her to keep moving, but she stopped, turning back toward the tunnel as the echoes faded. Her chest ached with fear, not for herself, but for the woman who had stood between her and danger without hesitation. Elias stepped closer, promising they would return for Saren, but only once they secured the documents somewhere safe. She knew he was right, but the guilt made her feel hollow. She gripped the papers with trembling hands, realizing each page held a truth powerful enough to reshape lives. As the first siren wailed in the distance, she looked at Elias. Whatever came next would demand courage neither of them had ever needed before, and yet she felt ready. Terrified, but ready. They moved quickly through the evening rush, blending into crowds that had no idea how close danger followed. The documents felt heavier with every block, as if they absorbed the fear and urgency pulsing through her veins. Elias stayed close, guiding her through side streets while checking behind them every few seconds. The city lights flickered to life, coating everything in a surreal glow that made their path feel both familiar and foreign. She knew they were being hunted. Saren's sacrifice had bought them minutes, not safety. The truth was no longer something hidden in files or whispers. It was alive, electric, and pressing hard against her sense of self. She wasn't running from heartbreak anymore. She was running from people who believed she held the power to destroy them. And for the first time, she wondered if they were right. They ducked into a narrow side alley, seeking a moment of quiet. But the silence there felt too sharp, too watchful. Elias insisted they needed to reach a safe location, a public office where the documents could be verified and protected. She hesitated, torn between fear and resolve. Part of her wished she could rewind time too before any of this began. But another part knew she had crossed a line she could never step back from. She lifted her gaze to Elias, searching for strength she wasn't sure she possessed. He promised they would finish this together, his voice trembling with sincerity. And when distant footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley, she understood there was no more time for doubt. There was only forward. They reached the government building just as the evening sky dimmed into deep blue. The glass facade reflected their exhausted faces as they climbed the steps, each one feeling like a small victory. Inside, the quiet lobby felt strangely comforting, a space untouched by the chaos chasing them. She approached the front desk, prepared to hand over the documents, but Elias stopped her, insisting they needed a specific official. Someone Saren had trusted. Before she could respond, the entrance doors burst open. Two figures rushed in, shadows of the same people who had cornered them earlier. Fear tightened her chest, but something inside her, something hardened by betrayal, truth, and survival, pushed her forward. She realized she wasn't powerless. She was the reason they were here at all. The tension snapped like a struck wire. Elias pulled her toward a secure hallway while alarms automatically triggered, filling the building with sharp, pulsing warnings. Security officers rushed in, but the intruders moved with calculated speed, weaving past every barrier. She could hear their footsteps behind her, relentless, determined. Elias urged her to reach the office at the end of the hall, the only place Saren said the documents would be safe. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself harder. The hallway lights flickered, casting shifting shadows that made everything feel unstable. When she reached the office door, she slammed her hand against the panel, praying it would open in time. As the lock disengaged with a sharp click, she felt the world hinge on a single breath. She burst into the office and slammed the door shut behind them. Elias locked it as she raced to the desk, placing the documents under the verification scanner Saren had mentioned. The machine hummed to life, its screen glowing with data that began to unwind the secrets buried in the pages. Outside, the pounding on the door grew louder, more frantic. Elias braced himself against it, shouting for her to hurry. As the scanner completed its upload, the system sent the information to multiple legal and public sources at once. Irreversible. Unstoppable. She watched the confirmation appear on the screen, a single message sealing everything. Data released. The pounding suddenly stopped. Silence swallowed the room. She turned to Elias, realizing the danger hadn't vanished, but the power had shifted. Not to Saren, not to Elias, to her. And for the first time, she felt ready to carry it.